Whenever you're, and you, yes.
All right, good evening. My name is Chelsea. And first I'd like to start by seeing a show of hands. How many of you enjoy playing video games? Yeah, me too. They're very fun. But my claim is that violent video games create hostility among youth. And video games are becoming more violent and more realistic. This is having a lasting effect on today's youth. In schools across America, teachers are noticing more aggression and expressed anger in some of their students. Psychologists have linked this behavior to playing video games such as Resident Evil, Grand Theft Auto, 25 to Life, Halo, and many more. Let's see, I've got a few points I'd like to go over tonight. First is how exposure to violent video games affects children. Second, why children become desensitized to video games. Third, the computer graphics and new technology in these new games. And fourthly, lastly, how violent video games affect us physically. So firstly, exposure to violent video games increases aggression in thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. A New York psychologist, Elizabeth Carl, agrees that exposure to violence in media, such as movies, TV, violent video games, can lead to the acceptance of aggressive behavior. And so, the more children watch and play these violent video games, the more they're likely to act out aggressively. And so, another psychologist and family therapist, Dr. David Walsh, says 79% of American children now play computer or video games on a regular basis. And children between the age of 7 and 17 play an average of 8 hours a week. Wow. Let's look at this 8 hours a week. 8 hours a week turns into 32 hours a month. 32 hours a month turns into 424 hours a year. And that's on average, so some players are playing even more. And that, looked at a span over 10 years, is roughly 4,240 hours of video game play. That study did not say whether or not this is violent video game play, but the National Product Diary Group reported that 1.3 of the $9 million worth of video games sold were rated mature. And so secondly, looking at how this video game play acts out, we know that children become desensitized to violence through repetition and reward. Going back to Dr. Welch, repetition increases learning. After a while, violence is not such a big deal because you've seen it over and over and over again. In addition to repetition, video games are goal-oriented and award-based, which promotes violence in this. Most video games are set up as a structure of levels. In order to make it to the next level, the player must destroy everyone. Another example of awards achieved in violent video games is that the more destructive the player is, the better their weapons become, like in 007. And thirdly, I'd like to go over the computer graphics and special effects that are becoming more and more realistic. It can be difficult for the brain to discern whether this is real or fantasy. The introduction of 3D modeling and evolution of technology has brought a sense of authenticity into the gaming world. So again, going back to Dr. Welch, he says, children are more likely to imitate the actions of a character with whom they identify with. In violent video games, the player is often required to take the point of the shooter or perpetrator. Examples of this are the Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, 007, Gears of War, and Halo. And lastly, what happens to us when we're playing these violent video games? Well, heart rate and blood pressure increase when playing violent video games. In a study conducted by Ballard and Weiss, they showed that blood pressure increased in more bloody video games. They took Mortal Kombat and they had people play with blood turned on and with blood turned off. And when blood was turned on and they were duking it out and blood's flying and it's getting violent, heart rates went up and blood pressure went up. So it was much more realistic and the body reacted the way it would in real life. But when the blood was turned off, those were normal. So in conclusion, due to the vividly graphic and violent video games, children have become immune to violence and feel that it is okay to repeat things they have seen and played.
All right, Chelsea, the attention device introduction is fine. You've got a very clear statement of what the claim is, and there's a little bit of background information setting it up. I do think, though, the problem with the secondary points that you're labeling in your preview is that most of them are not phrased as declarative sentences or claims. They sound like they're informative in nature. You're going to be describing what the graphics are, not telling us how, what's the inference that we should get from those graphics. It's that the graphics increase the degree of reality to it, or the descriptive graphics have a stronger impact on the kids' desensitization or their acceptance of the violence. And that's what you need to have as those claims, so they're declarative statements. I thought you were very consistent about citing your information. You gave us the quotes on a regular basis. I did think maybe Dr. Walsh got quoted a few too many times, in a short speech like this. A couple of other sources would be helpful. You had some good examples, and there are a couple of good statistics also. I thought the presentation is paced very nicely, although you've got a lot more time to talk about the subject, and so I think there's room to add some more substance. Your explanations are pretty clear, and like I said, I thought it was delivered nicely. The evidence is good, but it could be stronger, and I think you need to do that a little bit more, especially when you're making some of the inferences. We got, for instance, the inference about their blood pressure being affected, but then we're going from that to they find it acceptable. I don't know why somebody's increased blood pressure would make something acceptable, and there needs to be a clear explanation or some line of reasoning that draws that conclusion that's not followed through here in the speech. All right, thank you very much.